Be seated. The Texan dies and goes to hell. While down there, the devil notices that the Texan is not suffering like the rest. So he checks the gauges and he sees that it's 90 degrees and about 80% humidity. He goes over to the Texan and asks why he's so happy. And the Texan says, well, I like it here. The temperature is just like Texas in June. Well, the devil isn't happy with the Texan's answer, so he goes over and he turns up the temperature to 100 degrees and the humidity to 90%. After turning everything up, he goes looking for the Texan and he finds him standing around unbuttoning his shirt, just as happy as he can be. So the devil quizzes the Texan again as to why is he so happy. And he says, well, this is even better. It's like Texas in July. Well, the devil is now clearly upset, and he decides to really make the Texan suffer. So he goes over and he turns the controls up. He turns up the heat to 120 degrees and the humidity to 100%. Now let's see what the Texan is up to. So he goes looking for him, and he finds him taking his shirt completely off, and again, he's as happy as ever before. And the devil cannot figure it out. He asks the Texan why he's happy now, and he replies, this is great. It's just like Texas in August. Well, the devil says, that's it. I'm going to get this guy. So he goes over and he turns the temperature down to a freezing 25 degrees. Let's see what the Texan has to say about this. The devil looks around and he finds the Texan jumping up and down for joy, yelling, the Rangers have finally won the World Series. You know, when hell freezes over. And actually, the Rangers are playing pretty well right now. They're 2.5 games up over the Astros, so they're doing pretty well. So my sermon title today is Resist the Devil. And obviously, if you were listening earlier, this is taken from our reading from the letter of James in the New Testament. James had a notion that the devil is up to no good, and so he advises his readers to submit to God and resist the devil. And the result of resisting the devil is that he will flee from you. I have this image in my mind of a frightened devil running away from us with his tail tucked between his legs. Now, some people take this sort of thing very literally, right? Martin Luther, the 16th century Protestant reformer, believed that he was engaged in a personal battle with the devil, with God's help, of course. In the hymn, A Mighty Fortress is Our God, Luther refers to the devil as our ancient foe, one who is armed with cruel hate. There was no love lost between Luther and Lucifer. Luther famously threw a bottle of ink at the devil and left a big stain. He had a rather vivid imagination. Now, I too believe that we should resist the devil, although I have a different, more contemporary understanding of what that word devil means. When I think of the devil, I don't personally think of a real person, traditionally understood as a crimson man with hooves, horns, and a tail, carrying a pitchfork. And I hope that doesn't offend anyone. If it does, I'm asking you to bear with me for a moment. I have learned over the years that some Christians get more offended if you don't believe in a literal devil than if you question Jesus' divinity or even the existence of God. I've learned that lesson over the years. Now, the reason I don't personally subscribe to a literal personal devil is because I have a decent understanding of how the concept of an evil God or a God-like creature arose among the Jews and then the Christians. The devil's roots lie in the Persian religion, Zoroastrianism. And what happened was, while the Jews were under the Persian influence a few hundred years before Jesus, they began to borrow from the Persians some of their beliefs, and they began to entertain the notion of a Satan, what we call Satan, translated as the adversary. And this is something that evolved over time. If you look at the Satan in the book of Job, he's a very different, or a slightly different character than the devil that you get in the New Testament. So there's a little bit of an evolving concept there. So before I continue on with this, let me be very clear what I'm saying. I personally don't subscribe to a literal devil, although some of you might, and if you do, that's okay. I have no quarrel with that. But I think we should be honest about one thing. Whether we believe in a literal personal devil or not, few, if any of us, I would be surprised if any of you get up in the morning thinking that you are going to come face to face with the devil and you might need to throw something at him. So while our beliefs may differ about the devil, our experience of what the devil represents is very similar. We all have known devilish things. For example, the letter of James attributes to the devil such things as bitter envy, selfish ambition, conflicts, and disputes. All of us have experienced and lived through and had real life encounters with that which is devilish. I'll never forget how, Linda, you always referred to the cancer that Larry battled as the devil. And I think entirely appropriate to call that the devil. So how should we resist the devil, as James tells us to do? Well, either by coincidence or divine providence, I've been reading a book, and I shared this with the people on retreat last week. It's a book by a fellow UCC pastor from Oklahoma City. It is titled Spiritual Defiance, Building a Beloved Community of Resistance. There's that word, resistance. The author, Robin Myers, and I know John and Pat, they know him pretty well because Robin is a pastor in the conference where John used to serve. Robin focuses his book on three things he feels Christians should resist. Resist. One is the ego. And then, surprisingly, he says we should resist the orthodox teachings of the church. And then he says we should resist the empire in which we dwell. So obviously a very provocative book, what he's talking about. But let me just kind of briefly touch on those. On the first point, that is resisting our own egos, I think Robin would agree with James that selfish ambition is devilish. Robin admits that this is something he struggles against on a daily basis because he is a very successful pastor and author. And so he says it's hard to be humble when people are putting you up on a pedestal. Resisting our personal pedestals is resisting the devil. His second point is that we should resist orthodoxy. Now, what is orthodoxy? Well, that just simply means what the church understands as the right or correct teachings. What are the right doctrines of the church? That is considered to be orthodoxy. And he says we should resist that. Well, that was interesting. But what he means is this. Orthodoxy is great as a flexible guide to the faith. But when it becomes inflexible, it can become the devil. I saw this firsthand years ago while attending Baptist universities in Texas. Baptists historically were non-creedal people. They didn't believe in statements of faith or anything concrete like that, anything of that nature. They championed freedom of thought and freedom of conscience. You couldn't lock down a Baptist about what they believe or should believe, in other words. However, while I was attending those Baptist institutions, there was a sort of a fundamentalist movement within Southern Baptist life, and they began to take over the seminaries and a lot of the colleges and universities. And one of the things they did is they began forcing the professors to sign statements of faith. Well, if you were a true historical Baptist, you were not willing to do that. What was happening was they wanted to dictate their own brand of orthodoxy, and this caused a lot of problems. To use James's terminology, it caused a lot of conflicts and disputes, to say the least. So real or imagined, in my opinion, being in the midst of all that, going through that with everyone, it was the work of the devil. So resisting orthodoxy is resisting the devil, he says. Now, I'm not quite sure what Robin says about his third point, which is resisting the empire, because I haven't read that far yet. Although I do know he reminds us that Christianity was born in the context of the Roman Empire, and now we all live in the greatest empire in the history of the world, that is the American empire. How do you resist the empire? Interestingly, we have seen resistance to the empire recently in the actions of a lady named Kim Davis, who is the county clerk from Kentucky who was all over the news for refusing to issue marriage licenses to gay and lesbian couples. And I know Robin Myers would completely disagree with her stance on gay marriage, and yet he must be thinking that on some level this is a model of resistance against the empire. We just need to make sure our resistance is more reminiscent of Rosa Parks than the bus driver, right? When you think about it, the Bible is a series of stories and teachings about resistance and defiance. From Adam and Eve defying God's strange instructions not to eat the fruit from the tree, to Moses' defiance of Pharaoh, to David's defiance of Goliath, to Job's resistance to curse God for his sufferings, to Daniel's defiance in the lion's den, to the prophet's defiance of unjust kings, to John the Baptist's resistance to Herod, to Jesus' resistance to succumb to the temptations of the devil, to the Apostle Paul's resistance to the orthodoxy of the church in Jerusalem, to the writer of the book of Revelation's defiance of the Roman Empire. It's all there. The Bible is a collection of stories of resistance and defiance. Now, the book of Psalms begins with a spiritually defiant psalm written to encourage the children of God to resist that which is devilish. Happy are those, Linda led us through this litany, right? Happy are those who do not follow the advice of the wicked, who resist the wicked, or take the path that sinners tread, or sit in the seat of scoffers. He's saying, stand firm, resist, be defiant. And then the psalmist offers a wonderful metaphor for resistance. It's a great image. He writes, they, the defiant, are like trees planted by streams of water, which yield their fruit in its season, and their leaves do not wither. In other words, he's saying, be defiant as a tree, or be as defiant as a tree, that which resists the onslaught of nature, that which bends without breaking. Be resistant. Now, Jesus, of course, was as defiant as anyone in history. After he resisted the devil in the wilderness, he resisted laws against touching lepers, against eating with sinners, against talking to women, against healing on the Sabbath. He resisted the urge to act like those who run empires and fight against their enemies. He resisted the instinct of self-preservation. And then, in an ultimate act of resistance, he defied death. In our reading today from Mark chapter 9, he teaches his disciples to resist the temptation to seek to be the greatest and to seek to be first. And this is the resistance of ego that Robin Myers writes about in his book. The advantage of resisting our egos is that it opens us up to the most vulnerable people in our society. And in Jesus' day, that included children who were not valued at all. He says, whoever welcomes one such child, this invaluable, child that's supposed to not even be seen or heard, whoever welcomes that child welcomes me. And therefore, he is resisting the voices that told him to ignore the children. We could go on and on about Jesus. Resist the devil, writes James, and he will flee from you. I love that. That sounds like a plan to me, right? So, in what ways can we, St. John United Church of Christ, build a beloved community of resistance, to use Robin Myers' subtitle? I think if you ask people in this community about us, many of them would say that we are one of the most defiant congregations they have ever known, right? Like Jesus, we have resisted our demise. The rumors of our death have been greatly exaggerated. We are defying those who have done everything they can to force us to make choices they want us to make, particularly about this building and about this property. Now, for our future, however, we can't just be known as the church that defied and resisted the pressures of the community, can we? Our resistance, at some point, must become, dare I say it, more Christ-like. Can we, for instance, resist our collective ego so that we put the interests of others ahead of our own interests? Can we resist the urge to create a homogeneous congregation at our new site, a new German church, if you will? In other words, can we not use our heritage as a foundation for an openness to authentic diversity? Can we do that? Can we resist the temptation to be a congregation that is so focused on our own wants and desires that we forget our mission and our purpose for being? I mean, let's face it, like all congregations, we have a lot of temptations to resist. The devil, real or imagined, has done everything in his power to eradicate our future. But he will not win this one. So I invite you to join with me in the resistance. Resistance gives birth to resurrection. And that's when the devil runs away with his tail tucked between his legs. Amen.